What if I told you the reason most people die with regret is not because they failed, but because they waited? I am 101 years old. I have buried friends, watched generations rise and fall, seen people gain everything and still lose what mattered most. And after all these years, after all the funerals, the quiet hospital rooms, the last conversations whispered too late, I can tell you this with absolute certainty. Most people do not regret what they did. They regret what they delayed. They regret the words they rehearsed but never spoke, the chances they carefully analyzed but never took, the life they kept preparing for but never actually lived. You might think regret comes from big mistakes, dramatic failures, but that is not what I have seen. Regret is quieter than that. It grows slowly, silently. It hides behind responsibility, behind logic, behind phrases like not now, later, when things settle down. It disguises itself as patience, when in truth it is often fear wearing a polite face. I have watched men work for 40 years to provide for their families, only to realize in their final days they never truly knew them. I have seen women carry dreams in their hearts for decades, waiting for the right time, only to discover the time had quietly passed them by. And the most painful part? They knew. Somewhere deep inside, they always knew. But they convinced themselves they had more time. That is the lie that follows people to the end of their lives. Time feels abundant when you are young. It stretches out in front of you like an endless road. You think you can postpone your happiness, delay your courage, silence your truth, and come back to it later. But life does not work that way. Because while you are waiting, life is moving. People change. Opportunities disappear. Energy fades. Priorities shift. And one day, without warning, you look back, and the window you thought was open is gone. At 101, I no longer see life as years. I see it as moments you either honored or abandoned. And most people, without realizing it, abandon far too many. So, if you are listening to me now, understand this. The reason most people die with regret is not because life was unfair to them. It is because they kept choosing comfort over truth. And every time you choose comfort over truth, you move one step closer to a life that does not belong to you. I did not come this far to speak gently about this, because this is not a small mistake. This is the mistake. And if you understand it now, truly understand it, you still have time to live differently. Let me tell you what regret actually looks like, because most people misunderstand it. They imagine regret as something dramatic, something loud, something that announces itself clearly. A failed business, a broken marriage, a visible collapse that everyone can point to and say, that is where it all went wrong. But after 101 years of watching lives unfold and close, I can tell you with certainty that real regret is far more subtle and far more dangerous than that. It does not scream. It does not demand attention. It whispers. It hides in ordinary days, in routine decisions, in quiet compromises that seem harmless in the moment. It appears late at night when a person is alone, staring at a ceiling, replaying conversations that never happened, imagining paths they never took, asking questions they avoided for decades. What if I had tried? Or what if I had said what I truly felt? What if I had chosen differently when it mattered most? And understand this clearly, those questions do not come from failure. They come from avoidance. At 101, I have sat beside many people in their final days, and I want you to understand something that may change how you see your entire life. When life is coming to an end, people do not talk about their achievements. They do not list their accomplishments or measure their worth by how much they earned, how much they built, or how many people admired them. None of that carries the weight you think it does. Instead, they talk about what was missing. They talk about the moments they were absent from, the risks they refused to take, the truths they chose not to speak. I have never heard a man say, "I wish I had worked more, so so." But I have heard countless men say, "I wish I had been there. Or was. I have never heard someone say, "I am glad I played it safe my entire life. Mature to me stendas decidad." But I have heard many say, "I wish I had taken the risk when I had the chance." And perhaps the most painful words I have heard, repeated in different forms across different lives, are these: "I wish I had been myself." That is the pattern you must see. Not failure, but hesitation. Not catastrophe, but slow, consistent self-denial. People spend their lives trying to minimize discomfort. They avoid rejection, avoid uncertainty, avoid conflict, and in doing so, they become skilled at protecting themselves from anything that might disturb their sense of stability. But here is the truth that reveals itself only over time. Every time you avoid discomfort, you are also avoiding growth. The two are inseparable. You cannot have one without the other. And when you build a life around avoiding discomfort, you are not building a life. You are constructing a cage that feels safe but slowly disconnects you from who you really are. This does not happen in one decision. It happens in small, almost invisible moments. You choose the safe answer instead of the honest one. You follow the expected path instead of the meaningful one. You say yes when you want to say no, and you stay silent when something inside you is asking to be expressed. Each of these choices feels minor at the time. You tell yourself it is not worth the trouble, not worth the risk, not worth the discomfort. But these small decisions do not disappear. They accumulate. They layer on top of each other, shaping your life in ways you do not immediately notice. And one day, often much later than you expect, you look around and realize that the life you are living does not feel like yours. It feels constructed, managed, maintained, but not truly lived. Now listen carefully, because this is where most people misunderstand the nature of regret. Regret is not caused by a lack of opportunity. It is caused by a lack of alignment. Two people can be given the same circumstances, the same chances, the same environment, and yet arrive at completely different endings. One feels fulfilled. The other feels empty. The difference is not external. It is internal. It is the degree to which each person chose to live in alignment with what they knew to be true. I knew a man once, successful by every standard you could imagine. He built a respected career, earned financial security, gained admiration from his peers, and lived a life that others envied. But in his final weeks, he said something to me that I have carried ever since. He said, "I spent my whole life becoming someone I didn't even like." That sentence contains more truth than most people are willing to face. He did everything right according to the world. He followed the rules, met expectations, achieved what he was told would make him happy. But he ignored the quiet voice inside him, the one that questioned his direction, the one that asked him to choose differently. And that voice never disappeared. It does not disappear for anyone. You can ignore it. You can silence it temporarily. You can distract yourself with responsibilities, with goals, with noise, but you cannot erase it. It remains, waiting patiently beneath everything else. And when life begins to strip away the distractions, when time becomes limited, when priorities become clear, that voice returns with a question that cannot be avoided. Why didn't you listen? I have heard that question too many times, spoken in different ways, but carrying the same weight. And I do not want you to hear it at the end of your life. So let me give you the cause of regret as clearly as I can, without softening it, without making it easier than it is. Regret is the result of repeatedly choosing who you are expected to be over who you actually are. That is the mechanism. That is the pattern that repeats across generations, across cultures, across entirely different lives. It is not dramatic, which is why it is so easy to miss. It is quiet, consistent, and reinforced by everything around you. From a young age, you are taught, directly and indirectly, to seek approval, to fit in, to behave in ways that are rewarded, accepted, and validated by others. You learn what is praised and what is discouraged. You learn how to present yourself in ways that make life easier, smoother, more predictable. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to shape yourself according to those expectations. At first, it feels necessary. Then it feels normal. And eventually, it feels like who you are. But it is not who you are. It is a version of you that has been adapted to survive within a system of expectations. And survival, as I have learned over a century of living, is not the same as living. Many people survive their entire lives. They meet their responsibilities, fulfill their roles, maintain stability, and avoid major disruptions. From the outside, their lives appear successful, even admirable. But inside, there is often a quiet dissatisfaction, a sense that something essential is missing. They cannot always explain it, they cannot always name it, but they feel it. That feeling is the distance between who they are and how they have chosen to live. And when that distance remains unaddressed for too long, it becomes regret. Not loud, not explosive, but heavy. A quiet, persistent sadness that settles in the background of a person's life. Not because something went wrong, but because something never truly began. Because the life they were meant to live was postponed, redirected, or quietly abandoned in favor of something safer, something more acceptable, something easier to maintain. That is what I have seen over and over again. Not lives destroyed by failure, but lives diminished by hesitation. Not people who tried and lost, but people who never allowed themselves to fully try. And that is why regret is so painful at the end of life, because it is not about what happened. It is about what never happened, what was never explored, what was never expressed, what was never allowed to exist. So if you are listening to me now, understand this deeply. The danger is not that you will fail. The danger is that you will succeed at the wrong things, live according to the wrong priorities, and arrive at the end of your life realizing that you were present for everything except your own life. Now you might be asking yourself a difficult question. If this pattern is so clear, so common, and so painful at the end of life, why do people keep repeating it? Why do intelligent, capable, self-aware individuals still arrive at the same place, looking back with a quiet sense that something essential was missed? The answer is not ignorance. Most people at some level already know what matters. They know when they are holding back. They know when they are being dishonest with themselves. They know when a decision does not feel right, even if it looks right on the outside. The problem is not a lack of awareness. The problem is the presence of fear, refined, rationalized, and disguised so convincingly that it feels like wisdom. Fear rarely introduces itself as fear. It does not say, I am stopping you from living your life. It speaks in a much more reasonable voice. It says, be careful. It says, this is not the right time. It says, you have responsibilities. It says, think about the consequences. Ansiya fun. And listen carefully. These statements are not entirely false. That is precisely why they are so powerful. They contain just enough truth to justify hesitation. They allow you to delay action without feeling like you are avoiding something important. Over time, this becomes a pattern. You begin to trust that voice. You begin to treat it as guidance rather than resistance. And slowly, almost without noticing, fear becomes a strategy. You start organizing your life around minimizing discomfort. You choose predictability over possibility. You design routines that keep everything under control. You avoid situations where you might be judged, rejected, or uncertain. On the surface, this creates stability. Your life looks structured, responsible, even successful. But beneath that structure, something is quietly weakening. Your sense of aliveness, because aliveness does not come from control. It comes from engagement. It comes from stepping into situations where you do not have all the answers, where you are required to grow, to respond, to reveal who you are. When you remove those experiences from your life, you may feel safe, but you also begin to feel empty. Not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually. A subtle dissatisfaction begins to emerge. You may not be able to explain it. Everything in your life may appear to be in place. You may have stability, security, even comfort, but something feels incomplete. That feeling is not a lack of success. It is a lack of alignment. Alignment between what you are doing and who you are becoming. And here is where many people make another mistake. They believe alignment is something you find through thinking. They believe if they analyze enough, plan enough, wait long enough, clarity will arrive. But clarity does not come from thinking alone. It comes from action. It comes from stepping forward without full certainty and allowing experience to shape your understanding. This is where most people hesitate. They wait to feel ready. They wait for a guarantee. They wait for a sign that cannot be misinterpreted. But life does not operate on guarantees. It operates on decisions made in uncertainty. At 101, I can tell you this with complete honesty. Every meaningful decision I ever made felt uncertain at the time. There was no perfect moment, no complete clarity, no assurance that things would work out. There was only a quiet sense, a feeling that something was true, even if I could not fully explain it. And each time I chose to follow that feeling, even when it was inconvenient, even when it disrupted my plans, it moved me closer to a life that felt real. Not easy, not predictable, but real. Most people spend their lives chasing what appears to be the right life. A life that looks good from the outside, that meets expectations, that earns approval. But there is a difference between a life that looks right and a life that feels right, and that difference becomes impossible to ignore over time. You can maintain an appearance for years, even decades. You can convince others, and sometimes even yourself, that everything is as it should be. But eventually, the internal experience begins to conflict with the external reality. And when that gap widens, it creates a kind of quiet tension that follows you everywhere. So the question becomes, how do you close that gap before it turns into regret? You begin by paying attention to the small moments, the ones that seem insignificant but are actually decisive. The moment you choose silence instead of honesty. The moment you agree when you feel resistance. The moment you delay something important because it feels uncomfortable. These moments do not feel like turning points, but they are, because your life is not shaped by a few major decisions. It is shaped by repeated patterns, and patterns are built from small choices made consistently over time. If you consistently choose comfort, you build a life centered around comfort. If you consistently choose truth, you build a life centered around truth. There is no sudden transformation at the end. There is only the accumulated result of what you have practiced. That is why this matters now, not later. Because later is simply a continuation of what you are doing today. Now, I want to be clear about something, because this is often misunderstood. Living truthfully does not mean being reckless. It does not mean abandoning your responsibilities or ignoring the practical realities of life. It means being honest about what matters to you and making decisions that reflect that honesty, even when it requires courage. It means acknowledging the direction you feel drawn toward and taking steps in that direction, even if they are small, even if they are uncertain. There will be consequences. Some people will not understand your choices. Some paths will become more difficult. Some opportunities will no longer be available to you. But these are temporary costs. They are part of the process of living a life that is actually yours. The alternative may feel easier in the moment, but it carries a different kind of cost, one that does not disappear, one that grows heavier over time. That cost is regret, and regret is not simply a feeling. It is a realization. The realization that you had the opportunity to live differently, to choose differently, to act on what you knew to be true, and you did not. That realization does not come with noise or drama. It comes quietly, but it carries weight. It stays with you. It reshapes how you see your past, and it cannot be undone. I have seen people try to make peace with that realization. Some succeed in their own way, but many struggle, not because they made mistakes, but because they never gave themselves permission to fully live. They followed expectations, avoided risks, maintained stability, and in doing so, they missed the experience of being fully present in their own lives. So, if you want to avoid that outcome, you must begin now. Not with a dramatic change, not with a complete reinvention, but with a shift in how you respond to the moments in front of you. When you feel the impulse to speak, speak. When you feel the pull to act, act. When you recognize that something matters, do not postpone it without questioning why. Because the difference between a life of regret and a life of peace is not found in time. It is found in how you respond to these moments, again and again, until they form a pattern. And that pattern becomes your life. At 101, I am not telling you this as a theory. I am telling you this as someone who has seen the outcome from every angle. I have seen what happens when people follow fear, and I have seen what happens when they follow truth. The paths look similar at the beginning. Both can appear reasonable, responsible, even wise, but over time they separate, and where they lead is very different. One leads to a life that is controlled, predictable, and externally validated, but internally incomplete. The other leads to a life that may be uncertain, sometimes difficult, occasionally misunderstood, but deeply, unmistakably real. And when the end comes, that difference is no longer subtle. It is everything. So here I am at 101, not offering you motivation, not offering you comfort, but offering you something far more valuable: clarity. After a lifetime of watching how lives unfold and how they end, I can tell you this without hesitation: your life will not be defined by how much time you had. It will be defined by how honestly you used it. And honesty, in the way I am speaking about it, is not simple. It is not just about telling the truth to others. It is about facing the truth within yourself, the one that is easy to ignore, easy to postpone, easy to silence when it becomes inconvenient. It is the truth about what matters to you, the truth about what you want but are afraid to admit, the truth about the direction your life is trying to move in, even when you resist it. That is where everything begins, and that is also where most people turn away. Because turning toward that truth requires something most people spend their lives trying to avoid. It requires discomfort. It requires uncertainty. It requires the willingness to move forward without guarantees. And so, instead of facing it, people delay. They tell themselves they will deal with it later, when things are more stable, when they feel more ready, when the risks are lower. But that moment rarely comes. Time does not organize itself around your readiness. It moves whether you act or not. And while you are waiting, something subtle but irreversible is happening. You are building a pattern of hesitation, a pattern of choosing what is easy over what is true. And that pattern, repeated enough times, becomes your life. This is why I say to you, you do not need more time. You need more truth. Because time on its own changes nothing. You can spend decades waiting for clarity and still arrive at the end with the same unanswered questions. But the moment you begin to act on what you already know, however small that action may be, your life begins to shift. Not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily. Each honest decision brings you closer to alignment. Each moment of courage, no matter how quiet, reconnects you with yourself. And over time, those moments accumulate, just as hesitation once did. But this time, they build something different. They build a life that feels like it belongs to you. And when you reach the end, and you will, just as everyone does, you will not be measuring your life by perfection. You will not be counting your successes or failures. You will be asking a much simpler question. Did I live as myself? If the answer is yes, there is peace in that, even if the path was difficult, even if there were mistakes, even if things did not go exactly as planned. There is a kind of peace that comes only from knowing you did not abandon yourself. But if the answer is no, no amount of success can replace what was lost. So do not wait for a perfect moment, because it does not exist. Do not wait until you feel completely ready, because you never will. Do not wait until life forces you to confront what you already know. Start now. Speak what you have been holding back. Take the step you have been postponing. Make the decision that aligns with who you are, not just what is expected of you. Because the difference between a life of regret and a life of peace is not something you discover at the end. It is something you decide again and again, starting today.